So we're talking about the way of the warrior. Did everyone get the sheet of paper from last week and we're able to kind of look through it? I want us to start by looking at the bottom of the first page, and I'm going to share the words that are on there. And it's this, about the three universal powers. Because I want to make sure you understand those three universal powers. Because in reality, all of these, each path these powers are important to it. Okay, if we don't understand this, then we'll be ineffective in any of the paths that we choose. So the first one is presence. One of the things that I learned in seminary, because I think it's essential to being in the role that I'm in, is presence. To be there for. To in this moment, be in this moment. Because how many have ever been in a moment but not really been there?
Yeah.
Or had somebody else across the table from you not quite in that moment?
Yeah.
It's easy to do, isn't it? And at least part of each of these paths, but especially for the warrior, this idea of presence, this idea of showing up, and you can see the word that they use there, showing up energetically. Okay, bringing something to that moment, choosing to be visible in that moment. That's an important thing. So what are the ways that you develop presence? You can see here it talks about the four intelligences: mental, emotional, spiritual, and physical. And we've all had the times when we've been physically present, but maybe not the other. Or the times when the moment was making us so emotionally present that some of the others faded away, that we couldn't be there mentally because of how emotionally draining that moment was on us. What have you done to be able to increase your presence throughout your lifetime? What are some of the things that you've done that way?
Yoga.
I don't know that I was that great in my earlier years, but taking deep breaths certainly helps now.
Thank you, Melanie. It does. Just that one thing that our mamas or some teacher told us: count to 10 and breathe, right? And stop for a time. Laura, you were right as well. Yoga is a mindfulness type of thing which draws you back into a space of presence. And more than just the physical, thinking about your body type of presence,
right?
But a very much deeper. Anything else?
I think just making a conscious effort to make eye contact.
Yeah.
With someone else.
Yep, absolutely. That helps a lot, doesn't it? Siri, good to have you with us.
I have a great Reiki practitioner. I have to go get balanced from time to time on my chakras. Except she's not practicing right now during the virus.
And that's sometimes the challenge about a time like this, is those types of practices that were more communal practices, like yoga is often done in a group and someone leads. Reiki is often done with the person who leads you through. Sometimes that's what leaves us a bit unpresent for the moment, is because we don't have those communal aspects of things. And it doesn't mean that we have to turn it off. We can still do some of those practices, but we sometimes have to refigure them for ourselves, don't we?
Sometimes I've shown up physically when the rest of me was lagging behind, and often the rest of me catches up.
Yeah.
By the arriving someplace or doing something. I sort of call it automatic pilot. There's some things I do by rote, and then by doing them, I somehow gain more perspective.
Yeah, and here's the thing, Judy. Doing things by rote can be both good and bad. One of my amazing spiritual moments happened because I went with my friend Flora Dean to Our Lady of Perpetual Help in Glendale, because a friend of ours had passed away. Or no, actually it was a friend's mother. So there we were in that space of that funeral, and they were praying the rosary, which praying the rosary never has worked for me, right? Because it's a rote thing, and I get tired really fast of it and not very happy. But I watched, in 2 rows in front of me, over on my right side, there was a lady who almost glowed with the space that rote stuff had done in her, right? There she was praying. You could see something happening that just didn't happen to me at all in that moment. And so she was somehow in that space of that boring, repeatable prayer for me. She was in a whole different space, spiritually, emotionally, mentally. I don't know what all it did to her, but so we have to be careful always about saying, here's the only way to do it, because somebody does it differently and achieves that same thing that we're looking for, that space of presence. So how else have you found presence?
One thing I try and do is when I also make when I have conversations with someone, is to make eye contact, but also to really deeply listen to what they're saying and not try and focus in my own head what I'm going to say after they finish.
Yeah, and the hard part about that, Judy, is then it sometimes takes on a different flavor than what most of our conversations do, where we think we have to fill in the silence, because that type of conversation is filled with a lot more silence between your speech and my speech. And then back to your speech, because we're sitting in that space of, can I say it's kind of that Quaker space of listening to see who it is that should speak next.
Be comfortable with silence.
Sometimes it's silence. Yes, Paula.
I was going to say, maybe mine sort of ties further into what Judy's saying. I have a little voice inside my head that tells me, pay closer attention. And so I really try to really hone in on some details. And it just sort of blocks everything else out. And then I can be fully present.
Sure. So let's talk about one of our chief spiritual practices as Christians that sometimes works against this, not because it should, but because of the way we often teach it. How many have any kind of a thing like me where I struggle with the spiritual practice of prayer? I don't know how much people know how much I struggle with that. Because I was taught the right way to pray. And here's all the things you do. And here's the type of words you use. And it became always just a time of speaking rather than being more than that. And as I've watched people through my life, even as I see them using different words than what I used, I see us often using it as a way to speak, but not to stop and listen. And so we've underutilized the listening side of that spiritual pathway, I think to our own detriment. Protestants, well, and Catholics as well, kind of assigned the meditation side more to the Eastern Church. And then when Protestants broke off, they assigned it even more to Catholics and not us. We became more the intellectual, and we forgot the listening side of things. And in doing that, we lost a lot of our sense of finding presence. So what kind of practices are you trying to place in your life to remember?
I was taught that prayer is talking to God and meditation is listening. But I don't know what I think or feel. The Fourfold Way is reminding me about drumming and rattling
Yeah.
Also, I'm reminded about chanting, which
Yeah.
definitely gets me out of my head.
Yep.
Anything that gets me into my heart and helps me.
Yeah. See, our intellectualism drives us straight to our head. And that's definitely true in any kind of Protestant church. It's definitely truer in Western churches where we do a lot of head work. And we've got to figure out how to reverse some of that trend. And you're right, that the drumming, the meditation, all of that would hopefully drive us towards that other. But we too often assigned it as, oh, that's just what those natives do, or whatever it is, whoever we toss it on to, that's what those Buddhists do.
And when you're jogging, Jim, when you're running, isn't that kind of prayer or meditation for you?
It is. What's really good about that for me is that I can run without having to think. Well, you saw a couple of weeks ago how I didn't think really well. That's why I took a tumble and, scraped up my whole face. But generally, I don't have to have my whole attention on the activity, so it allows my spirit to wander in the midst of. And so I do a lot of listening during that time. But all of that is presence work, and we have to continue to do that. And you have to do it on all four of those levels: mental, emotional, spiritual, physical. And the more we hear words, for example, like big boys don't cry, that negates some of the emotional side of things, that tell us not to do this, that, or the other part of that, we lose some of that presence. Anybody who is in any way part of the non-intellectual part today, well, that's just too educational for me. Well, that's losing some of it too. You have to be the full rounded self to truly find presence. Okay. Second thing is communications. Oops. Aligning content, timing, and context. All right. How many have been like me? You knew all the right things to do, but you said it at the wrong time. You spoke it at a moment that didn't help at all. My hairdresser for years was the sister to a man who was Joni's boyfriend. And when he died, his name was Todd, we went to his funeral. And the pastor did one of those Baptist-y type of things where it became more of a who needs to be saved in this moment. And Denise, our hairdresser, basically sat there and went, how about caring for me right now? How about loving me right now? Maybe his words were right, but they were definitely at the wrong timing. Where have you run into this problem in your life, where context was wrong, or timing was wrong, or the content was wrong? Where have you failed or had somebody fail around you?
Almost every time I open my mouth.
Yeah, too many times to recount.
Yeah. The good news is you don't have to be perfect at this, but the mindful person is trying to become better at it and return to it. And if we want to walk the way of the warrior, for example, and we're not looking at the content that we're delivering, if we just accept that this thing has to be said no matter what, then we might just be failing. Even if our content seems right, if we're not addressing it to the moment. So as part of this, they said, Angela Zarian, and it's important that I remember that this week was her birthday, just so you know. And so this is a good week for us to celebrate who she is and what she's given to us in this book. She died almost 10 years ago now, 8 years ago, I think now, but she gave us some really good things to be able to move forward with. She reminds us that in this communication pattern of trying to bring content and timing and context together, we also have to look at how we speak, how we share. That it's not just the words I use, it's also the body language that I use. It's also the tone that I use, right? Because I can say, I love you, and be hitting you over the head, and it doesn't become very effective, does it? So which...
It's not very effective to gritted teeth either.
To do what?
With my teeth. Saying
Yeah.
I love you with my teeth gritted is not very effective either.
That's right. And so we have to look at all those. What words are we using? What tone are we using? What body language are we using as we're communicating? Which one of those? Go ahead.
I think it was a second grade class I had one year that were particularly adept at bringing all their playground war games into the classroom. And so it was, after lunch, it was this constant, he did such and such, he did such and such, they said, he said, on and on and on, and it was hard to get started. And so I talked with them about these issues are probably important, but I'm going to ask you to write them down. And so I had a yellow pad and encouraged them to write down their complaints and their issues. And I promised them that by the end of the day, we would go over those. Usually by the end of the day, they'd already gotten over it and solved it. And so nothing had to be solved. But it was interesting to watch that happen because they all scrambled for the pad of paper to tattle on each other. But then by the end of the day, it didn't matter anymore. But that immediacy sometimes is a mistake.
But that is part of all this is the immediacy, the emotionality of that moment sometimes draws us into less than perfect communication because we're thinking less in that moment. We're just reacting to. And at least part of the power of communication is having it be intentional, thoughtful, not just reactive. Now, the good news about that is that all of us have to give permission to all of us to sometimes be reactive and to give forgiveness for that reactive communication. Then we have to figure out how to come back with better, thoughtful moments after that. And that's hard for us because those reactive moments often become very deadly, dangerous, hurtful. We have to figure out how to overcome that, don't we?
Yes. Yes.
But that's why things like forgiveness is an important communication tool. And to remember that we don't forgive because the other person has fixed it all. We forgive to move back into a space of communication with that person or possible communication. Because that action or those words that they spoke position themselves as a wall between us, essentially limiting what we can do. So presence, communication, and the third of the three universal powers is position. That we have to sometimes decide what is most important and stop and say, here's my boundary. Here's my stance. Here's what I have to do. Martin Luther said, "Here I stand, I can do no other." We all of us don't have to stand at the same space as Martin Luther or anybody else, but we have to figure out when is it important to stop and take that stand. So what are some of your stand spaces? What is so important that you need to be there for that position?
Everything is so on hold right now with me. I can't even think of anything that's important. Nothing is testing me. No person is testing me. So.
But it might be even just that thing that everything's on hold, because there's a lot of people right now that are saying, "I want to go do something." And your
That's
position
true.
is,
That's
no,
true.
I am going to stay in this space.
Yeah. I'm watching more TV than I ever watched, and that seems to be what I'm seeing. And it's the younger people, and so my heart does go out for them. You can see it in their faces, how they're feeling. I can't imagine how I would be if this had happened the years I was working and self-supporting and so forth. So all I can do now is I'm grateful. I'm just filled with a lot of gratefulness right now. I'm not struggling with anything in particular.
About the rest of you, where are some of your stand spaces?
I was thinking about communication and listening. My picture's frozen, but can you still hear my voice?
Yes.
Okay. So I think, except with my husband and inner circle, I think I struggle with communication in these days. My stand or my boundary is that I always like to work things out, and I actually love dialogue. And Juan and I have a rule that we never go to bed angry. If someone's angry, there's always a guest room, but we process pretty fast. We always have coffee with each other in the morning, but we've had years to practice on our style, which works really well. But my desire to speak quickly and to resolve conflict quickly doesn't work for everyone. Some people like to take space. And in my family, taking space has been used to hurt one another. So I don't deal well. I'm trying to learn when someone needs a lengthy time of space. And I always want to come back together, and I want to transform relationships. And I have to learn that I can't always have my way. Then I have, other relationships that are easy. I find my relationship with Judy Robinson pretty easy. I find that we understand each other. And there's sort of 20 years of history, but different personalities need different things. So I can't always have my way, which is such a struggle.
and that's important about this. The attitude of position doesn't mean that it doesn't change. It's that you are in that moment saying, here I am, But if you're doing it right, you're still in that space of communication where you are saying, talk to me about it. So that hopefully we don't use this as the way that we bludgeon each other and say, and you don't. Because if we're taking our position against their position, and because my position is right, doesn't necessarily mean that other person's position is wrong.
Correct.
But we sure do that a lot, don't we?
So I heard a kernel of wisdom just the other day that said, if you are right, keep quiet.
If you are right, keep quiet.
I sort of love that, but I'm thinking about my stand during my lifetime, and I think the major one has been that children are important people and deserve respect.
Mm.
Yes, ma'am.
One.
Well, and it's important to remember, Judy, that type of thing is a position, but it's not a position of exactly, it's not a deterministic, here's how everyone has to act. It's an attitude towards life. And something that flavors the way you react to the people in life. And I think sometimes that's what they mean by position, is that we choose how to view and flavor the life that we see. So those are the three universal powers: presence, communication, and position. Remember that we will come back to that as we're trying to figure out the different things that we're doing, as we're trying to figure out what path right now is the appropriate path. As we go on to the warrior, what I wanted to start with warrior specifically, was the shadow aspects of the warrior, because we didn't talk about those much last week. All of these traits have shadow aspects, right? All of these paths, as good as they are, also have ways that they can carry us wrongly, right? And it talks about three of those aspects for the warrior. I wish we didn't have such a good example of number one, which is rebellion, which means that you stand there saying, I'm just going to do things differently than the norm, no matter how many people it hurts. I'm not going to do it like those who have gone before. I'm going to drain the...
Yeah, what's the word?
I'm not going to wear a mask at.
Yeah.
Not going to. Right? That's definitely being a leader, but is it being a warrior? Now, I got to tell you, having said that, it's really too easy for me to identify with many of these right here. I've been the outside the norm person a lot in my life. All right, I came from a very normative religion and I stepped completely away from that. And so I've often had to assert that different from. Sometimes I did it well. How about you? How are you the rebel instead of truly a warrior?
Oh.
Okay,
That's
I'll
pretty
say
much-
something.
No,
Oh, I'm sorry. Did you want to go ahead, hon, Meg?
that's okay. I was just going to say that I tend to follow the line. I'm not much of a rebel.
Yeah.
Well, mine is the over-identified with being independent, self-sufficient. When I became really sick and was, I mean, now I'm pretty much, I'm ambulatory, but for a while, a decade or so ago, I was pretty much bedbound. And it's learning, and then I went into assisted living for a while, and then I came out of that, and I came out of assisted living with $8 to my name, period.
Mhm.
And it was learning how to accept graciously help, and learning that, because I had always been the helper, the one who was out there being the special ed teacher, being the best friend, doing things for other people. And it's now, and even now, it's really hard to accept help for me. And even just asking for a ride somewhere, it's like, well, they're not going to want to take me because I'm out of their way, or just not being a part of things because I think I don't want to have to ask somebody else to help me. That's a big one for me.
Yeah. Judy, that's not just your dysfunction. That's a societal dysfunction. I think we tell stories in America about independence, do it my own way type of stories way too well. And we have to realize that I can't just rebel and say, I did it alone. I have to recognize that even in my rebellion, I'm depending on other people to be there. That we all are interdependent rather than completely the only determiner of life and how it's lived and what happens in it. But that's more than just you. That's us as a society. We tell that wrong story a lot. And so we get mad at societies that are much more communal, like China, that do a lot more of submitting the individual will to the corporate will. And we see some of the wrong aspects of those. And so we use that to be able to reinforce our rebellious attitude, our independent attitude. So that's a dysfunction we all fall prey to in America. Anyone else have a problem with that, with the rebellion shadow aspect? Then let's go on to the second one, that of having authority issues, which what it does is it says, let's make someone else be the one who does the work. Let's have someone else take the blame. Let's have someone, I don't want to be the chair of the committee. Let's let. Because then they'll be the one that is the one who has to take the blame as well as the responsibility. That can be done because we're over idolizing that person. We think that they're bigger, better, more than what they truly are, or because we're afraid. No, I should say it this way. It's because we're really competing with them and we want them to fail. And so we're put them as a leadership thing so that they fail instead of us working together to do it. All in all, what it means is I haven't claimed my own personal responsibility, my own personal force of leadership. It's that I'm trying to avoid that in some way or another. In every situation, every one of us has ability to alter that situation, don't we? To varying degrees. Sometimes it's minuscule, sometimes it's huge what I can do. But I can do something in that situation, can't I?
Is that similar? Is that like being passive aggressive in?
It can be, absolutely. Yep.
That would be me.
It's easy to do. Because if you just take the basic thing of a committee chairmanship, that's a daunting task. So it's much easier to thrust on someone else and say, you go do it because I'm afraid to fail. But part of leadership, part of being the warrior is saying, I'm not afraid to fail. I realize it's going to happen and I'm going to step into. But if you get into a lot of, when you fall prey to this shadow aspect, you do a lot of blaming, judging, you know, passing the buck, attacking things instead of truly solving things. So what do you do when either you are that type of person or when someone else is? What do you do in those situations? Let me tell you the bottom line about all of the shadow aspects. No matter how difficult they are, if we can take them and highly develop them in our leadership skills, they can go from becoming the dysfunctional thing that they are to where we can claim an aspect of leadership of equal magnitude in the positive as what these are in the negative. They hide something that could be a strength if we allow it to be. Okay? So authority issues, the fear of doing the wrong thing, the fear of projecting it onto someone else, is really in some ways recognizing that other people have strength as well. And so as we step into our into the leadership role, as we don't just thrust it onto someone else, as we step into that role, we also don't go in as an authoritarian saying, I have all the responsibility, I have all the power. We also recognize that all these other people need to be pulled into those places of leadership to be able to supplement myself and what I both am and what I'm not.
Yeah. Delegate in a way that empowers other people by recognizing their strengths in certain situations, I guess.
That's right. Don't just surround yourself with the sycophants that say, oh, you're doing such a great job, go be that. That's not what you want to be as a good warrior. As a good warrior, you want everyone to be empowered and moving and helping and contributing too. And if you can take this and fight that shadow aspect of it and develop the other side, it will make you much, much stronger, won't it? On the first one, the rebellion thing, what's that hiding? What is the leadership skill? What?
Insecurity.
It is hiding insecurity, but what's the positive that it's hiding when we go just the rebellion?
I don't know, kind of a institutional trust.
Yeah, it is. And what's tough about this is it's really, if we trust too much in just one view of that institution and don't listen to the rebellious voice, it means that our institution ultimately fails because it becomes stuck. And what the rebellious voice is saying is there's something else to see. There's something else to become. And so if we can get beyond just being a rebellious child, and we step into the, I'm going to hear all voices in my leadership, then we give a voice to somebody who challenges, but maybe draws us towards. And you see the value in that? Because that's when we're truly going to grow to a higher state than what we have been. Because otherwise we just perpetuate something good, but we don't grow. So the rebellious voice is needed, the anti-authoritarian voice is needed, but not in the aspect it usually presents itself, but in the stronger aspect. The third dysfunction, the third shadow aspect, is patterns of invisibility. Okay? The ways that we try to hide, hold back, ride the coattails of powerful people. That's usually because we have low self-esteem issues and the inability for us to see correctly both ourselves and, I believe, the situations around us. It takes bravery to step into this role. What the invisible person does see really well is the challenge, the danger, and the failure of the present situation. They're not naive, okay? The naive person has no clue about what's difficult here. This person sees the difficulty, but is running from it instead of figuring out how to develop the skills to overcome that challenge. In the present situation, what scares you about right now? Any of the pieces of right now, and what makes you want to just hide?
Everything.
Yeah.
The uncertainty, I guess, generally of whether this will end well or whether we'll come back and, you know, be just as selfish and greedy and
Yeah.
horrible as we are now as a general society.
Yeah. Well, and much of that is warranted because how many were taught really well in the last month or so that you can't control everything around you?
Right.
It is bigger than us. And so it is really easy to be able to say, because it's too large, I can't do anything. But because it's really large, I need to do something. So the invisible person recognizes the danger in this moment, but has to have the bravery to step into that danger, into that uncertainty, into the difficulty of not being able to fix it all. What aspect of this moment can you affect in the positive? And it can be as simple as this. Oh, I've forgotten to be as close to my grandchildren as what I should have been, because I was busy and they were busy, and I'm going to step back towards them and spend more time with them and give them more value. Right? It can be as simple as something like that. What is it that life in the past has where has it stolen your power?
Well, you know, in the past, I would have joined this thing or gotten into that thing, or the other day I discovered there's actually a little community center down from this church that I used to sing in, and I thought, oh, I'll go and I'll read to the children and we'll sing songs. And then I thought, well, I'm a senior. I'm in that high risk age, and children can be sick and have the virus and nobody know, which made me step back and think, do I want to do that? So there's been a lot of adaptations to aging for me, not just in this episode of coronavirus, but in the last 10 years. So sometimes I think it's just all I can do is a $5 here and a $10 there and a little bit here, a little bit there, and let some other younger people be the ones who are on the ground level and doing the work, and hopefully my little bit can do something. I haven't finished thinking this all out, but
right.
In
The
the past I would have.
Oh, go ahead. Keep going.
No, it's just in the past I've been showing up myself. What can I do?
Yeah. And as life goes along, we have to continually make those decisions of how am I being called to address this moment of history. And we might want to address it like the last moment of history. That might not be what it is that it now is called for. So it's a continual listening to what's happening here and now that it takes. We can't go back to pat answers.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, you know, on a very personal note that this has taken for me is just looking forward, this is going to sound terrible, looking forward to leave Tucson and go to Portland for the summer, where we just, you know, really enjoy our time there. And I get involved in some things that really give me a sense of value, the things that I volunteer and do there. And, you know, not knowing whether or not we'll be able to leave, when we'll be able to leave, how things will be different if and when we get there. So it's just a matter of continually reminding myself to be in the moment here and enjoy the very wonderful things that there are here to be a part of as well. So I guess that's kind of where I am right now. It's just sort of wishing.
Yeah. My mother-in-law is in the same space. She was supposed to leave mid-March to go back to San Jose, Santa Clara County, where they have a whole lot of cases. And her grandson, who lives with her, is an emergency room nurse. He told her, you cannot come back here. So for now 6 weeks or so, she's been living with us beyond what she thought her stay would be. And she's trying to figure out, who am I now? Who am I here? And that in a very real way is where many of us find ourselves a lot of the time, is trying to figure out, do I just stay invisible, or do I somehow step into this new role, whatever it is that's thrust upon us?
Well, I sometimes think that, at least for me, you feel like you have to do a big significant thing to make an impact. And we forget about the small things, to Melanie's point about the $5 or the $10, or just the feeling of true compassion for healthcare workers or for marginalized communities. And sometimes, you know, for me, it's like, oh my gosh, if I can't, you know, move a mountain, then I can't impact the situation at all. So it's that reminder of small things are good things and they move mountains.
And it helps if you remember that when we say warrior, we're not looking at just Chief Sitting Bull, right? Leading us into battle. Because the majority of the work of the warrior is not battle work. Okay? No matter how much warrior tends to give us images of war, that's not what she's describing in this book. The warrior is the one who in every moment, large or small, is leading people onward, leading people towards.
I was thinking about a local Starbucks in my neighborhood on the far east side that has just reopened, and they're serving coffee from a table on the sidewalk. You can order, they'll go in and make it, and they'll bring it out. And everybody is wearing masks and gloves. So we've restarted a rock.
Oops, we lost you, Sarah.
Affirmations on it. Oh, did you lose my voice?
For a minute.
I didn't hear you after you said we restarted. Could you go back to that?
We restarted our rock
Okay.
program, painting rocks and painting affirmations on the rocks.
Oh,
Can you hear me?
yeah.
And We can bring rocks with affirmations on them, or we can take rocks home with us. Of course, we're wiping them off to make sure that they're clean. And one of the baristers says, if you touch one, you have to take it. But this whole, come and get your coffee, stay in the parking lot, but we have boxes of rocks to cheer you on. And please go home and paint some rocks and bring them back, and we will hand them out. So I like morning coffee and an affirmation on my rock.
And that would seem, in the largest picture, a very small thing, but in the small picture it might be a huge thing, because somebody might pick up this particular rock and it becomes that which changes their life completely. Right? That's a warrior aspect. That's a warrior movement. Thank you. The tough part about the warrior is that the warrior, like all the other aspects, are going to fail. And we don't want to think that risk of failing is going to keep us away from that if we're not careful. We won't succeed in everything we do. We will lead down the wrong paths, or we will be unsuccessful in our leading. Nobody follows us. It doesn't mean we should stop doing that, because today, in this moment, we need warriors. We need people that are unafraid to call other people towards something, right? We need that in ourselves and in those people around us. Find your warrior space. Know that it won't solve everything, but it might just change the world for one person marvelously. Find where it is that you need to be that which will clear a path or shine a light for someone else and change the world that way. All right?
Jim, I really appreciate those last few words from you, because I feel at this time that's important for us to think about and absorb. And I feel like for me personally, much of my professional life, I've been a warrior, and I'm in a different environment now, in a different position, and which calls me, I think, to be less of a warrior and more of something else. So I'm looking forward to the next few discussions we have. But even in stepping back from that, I see that there is still something to call on, and I thank you for those words of encouragement.
Just know that we don't, any of us, only exhibit one of these aspects. It's not like we go off on this path and it completely diverges from all the other paths. We walk in a very real way all four of them simultaneously. And so the metaphor of paths kind of works against that idea, but one of them in any particular time might be more major than the other ones. So let me do a quick summary of just the warrior aspect for us. I think I sent this to you, yes or no? Okay, so in the middle are the three universal powers we talked about. Here's the three shadow aspects of the warrior. Over here is what we talked about a lot last time, the leadership skills that you have to develop in order to do that. We didn't talk much about this, and I'm sorry. On the sheet of notes that I sent to you, it talks more about this, because all of these things are important. This aspect of dancing, for example, is a really important thing about the warrior work. It talks about 5 different types of dances that you have to do. Each of them different, each of them important, and you as the warrior have to, in many ways, understand them all. Okay, the flowing rhythm is one that has fluidity and grace, but the rhythm of chaos has kind of the antithesis of that. that there's something new coming out of that. As the warrior, you have to understand both that which flows and that which works against the flow, which is the rock in the middle of the flow. And so read more about that. And those things over here, which we didn't talk about, will help you to be able to deepen who you are as a warrior. When Sarah talked about the chakras, that's down here in this area here. Finding that those power animals, those spaces within yourself, which speak a larger message than what, larger than just the surface message. Okay, find what it is that's standing in your way and what can empower you out of that. Okay, so this sheet will give you a really good quick overview of things, where the other sheet will go a little more in depth. Any last questions before we end? It's nice to look at a screen. I have my screen with all your pictures up there, and what I see is 9 warriors. Go and change the world. We need it right now, don't we?
Yes, we do.
All right, we'll see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you, Jim.
Thank you.
That's great. Thank you so much.
Appreciate it.
Arrivederci, ciao.